There was a moment near the end of Gene Wilder's life that almost feels too painful to be real. The man who once made millions of people believe that anything was possible inside a chocolate factory was sitting quietly in his final years, far away from the noise of Hollywood. The cameras were gone. The movie sets were gone. And the character the world remembered as Willy Wonka had become increasingly difficult for him to recognize even inside his own memories. But what happened to Gene Wilder was not simply a story about an aging actor disappearing from public view. There was something much deeper happening behind that silence. For years, people wondered why one of Hollywood's most distinctive performers had seemingly vanished. Why had he stopped making movies? Why did he rarely appear in public? Why did someone with such an unforgettable face and voice choose to live almost completely outside the spotlight? And eventually, the answer became heartbreaking. Wilder had been privately dealing with Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis his family said he did not want made public. But the most revealing part of his final years wasn't the diagnosis itself. It was the way he chose to live with it, the things he tried to protect, and the tiny moments that revealed just how much of the man audiences loved was still there. To understand those final years, you have to understand something that many people get wrong about Gene Wilder. His disappearance from Hollywood did not begin when his health declined. In fact, Wilder had already made a conscious decision to step away from major movie roles years earlier. In his final major public interview, recorded in 2013 when he was 80, Wilder explained that modern Hollywood had increasingly turned him off. He didn't like the growing emphasis on explosions, loudness, excessive profanity, and 3D spectacle. He wasn't interested in appearing in movies simply because they were big productions. He wanted something that meant something. He wanted characters who could talk, stories that had something to say, and films that didn't rely on noise to create excitement. So when audiences wondered why Gene Wilder wasn't appearing on screen anymore, the answer wasn't simply that Hollywood had forgotten him. Wilder had become increasingly selective about what he was willing to do. And there was another surprising side to him that rarely gets mentioned. People assumed that the man who played Willy Wonka, Dr. Frankenstein, and some of the wildest comic characters in movie history must have been hilarious every second of his private life. But Wilder himself rejected that image. When asked about the biggest misconception people had about him, he essentially explained that he wasn't actually the constantly funny person everyone imagined. His comedy lived inside his performances. Away from the camera, he was much quieter. He could make his wife laugh, but he didn't walk around behaving like one of his characters. That distinction becomes incredibly important when you look at his final years, because the public had spent decades confusing Gene Wilder with the extraordinary characters he created. The world remembered the manic energy. The private man was something else entirely. And perhaps that's why his later withdrawal was so easy to misunderstand. Gene Wilder wasn't necessarily hiding because he had nothing left to say. He had already found other ways to express himself. By the later stages of his career, he had become a writer and published fiction and memoirs, creating stories without needing a film crew, a studio, or a Hollywood machine around him. In a 2013 interview, he spoke about writing with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he hadn't abandoned creativity at all. He had simply moved it somewhere quieter. That matters because when people look back at his final decades, they sometimes imagine a forgotten star sitting alone after his fame disappeared. The reality was much more complicated. Wilder had built a different kind of life. But then something began changing that even the people closest to him could not immediately understand. According to his widow, Karen Boyer, one of the early signs was remarkably ordinary. Wilder struggled to remember the title of one of his own favorite movies, Young Frankenstein. Think about how strange that must have been. This wasn't some random piece of trivia. This was a film deeply connected to the man he had been, the work he had created, and the memories that had followed him for decades. And yet there came a point when the name wouldn't come. For someone whose entire life had been built around remembering lines, characters, stories, people, and performances, that kind of moment could carry a terrifying meaning. What makes the story even more emotional is that Wilder apparently didn't want the world to see him through the lens of his illness. His family later explained that he chose to keep his Alzheimer's diagnosis private. And there was a very personal reason behind that decision. Wilder had spent his life creating memories for other people. Children who had never met him personally still saw him and immediately thought of Willy Wonka. To them, he wasn't simply an elderly actor. He was the man from the chocolate factory. He was magic. He was mystery. He was the strange, unpredictable figure who could walk into a room and make the impossible seem completely believable. Wilder reportedly didn't want children who recognized him to suddenly look at Wonka differently because they had learned that the actor behind the character was sick. That decision reveals something extraordinary about him. Even when his own memories were becoming fragile, He was thinking about the memories he had given other people.
He could have allowed his diagnosis to become a public story.
He could have turned his declining health into interviews, appearances, and headlines. Instead, he protected his privacy.
He protected his wife.
And, in his own way, he protected Willy Wonka. That's one of the reasons his final years feel so different when you look at them closely.
There was no dramatic public farewell tour. No constant television coverage. No attempt to keep himself visible at all costs.
There was simply a gradual retreat into a private world where the people closest to him mattered more than the audience outside the door. But before his condition became overwhelming, Wilder's life was not simply tragic. That is an important part of the story that often gets lost. His later years included quiet routines and simple pleasures. He lived a much more private existence with Karen, and accounts of those years describe activities like painting, reading, and playing tennis. The contrast is striking. The same man who had spent decades surrounded by directors, actors, cameras, critics, and enormous audiences was now finding meaning in ordinary days. There was no studio demanding that he perform. No producer asking him to become someone else. He could simply wake up, read the newspaper, spend time with his wife, create something, and live. In a strange way, the life that looked smaller from the outside may have been more personal than anything Hollywood could offer him. And that makes one question especially haunting. Did Gene Wilder know how much the world still loved him? The evidence suggests that he understood the emotional power of his characters, but he seemed far less interested in celebrity itself. Even during his final major interview, he wasn't desperate to revive his career. He wasn't begging Hollywood to give him another chance. He had opinions about the industry, strong ones, but he had also made peace with walking away from parts of it. That is important because his retirement was not the conventional story of a star who couldn't find work. Wilder had already done enough to secure his place in film history.
He was choosing what kind of life he wanted after that.
In fact, one of the most revealing things he ever said about Willy Wonka shows just how carefully he thought about his characters. Wilder wanted Wonka's first appearance to be strange and unsettling. He wanted to enter with a cane, move slowly, stumble, fall, roll, and then suddenly rise. The reason wasn't simply to get a laugh. Wilder wanted the audience to become uncertain. From that moment forward, they wouldn't know whether Wonka was telling the truth or lying. That one creative decision tells you something about Wilder's genius. Beneath the comedy, he understood mystery. He knew that the most memorable characters aren't always the ones who explain themselves. Sometimes they are the ones who leave you wondering what they are really thinking. And ironically, that same quality became part of his own final story. For years, audiences were left wondering what was really happening to Gene Wilder. He had become increasingly invisible. His appearances were rare. His movie career had effectively ended decades earlier, and his public presence became smaller and smaller. But unlike the mysterious Willy Wonka, Wilder wasn't playing a character anymore. He was protecting something real. His family eventually revealed that the actor had been living with Alzheimer's disease, and that the illness had gradually affected his memory and ability to function. He died in 2016 at the age of 83 from complications of the disease. Yet even then, the final chapter wasn't what you might expect. According to Karen Boyer's recollection in the documentary Remembering Gene Wilder, just days before his death, something extraordinary happened. Wilder, who had not been walking independently for some time, suddenly got up and walked across the kitchen.
Then he said he wanted to go swimming. Imagine being his wife in that moment.
You have watched someone you love slowly lose pieces of himself.
You know his body has become weaker. You know his mind has changed.
And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he gets up and asks to go swimming. It was almost as though a small piece of the old Gene Wilder had suddenly returned.
Karen took him to the pool.
Wilder got into the water and managed a couple of strokes. Then he shook the water from his ear and said, "That's good."
It was such a simple sentence. No dramatic speech. No grand farewell. Just a man enjoying something he loved.
And Karen later believed that perhaps he simply wanted to experience the pool one more time. That tiny scene may tell us more about Gene Wilder's final years than any headline ever could. Even near the end, when so much had been taken from him, there were still moments when he could experience something familiar and say, in effect, "This is good." And then came the moment that makes the entire story almost unbearably intimate. In his final hours, Wilder was with Karen. Ella Fitzgerald was singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. The song was playing while they were together, and the atmosphere was quiet. Then Wilder said something that would become his final spoken words to his wife. "I trust you." And then, "I love you." Those weren't words delivered to an audience.
They weren't part of a script. They weren't a line written by a screenwriter.
They were simply the words of a husband speaking to the person who had remained beside him while his world gradually became smaller. There is something especially powerful about the fact that Wilder's final moments were so different from the characters that made him famous. Willy Wonka was mysterious. Dr. Frankenstein was frantic. His comic characters were often overwhelmed by chaos. Gene Wilder, the private man, ended his story quietly. There was music. There was his wife. There were memories, some still present and some slipping away. And there was trust. After a lifetime of making audiences laugh, he didn't need one final joke.
He didn't need applause. He needed the reassurance of someone he trusted. That may be the part people misunderstood most about Gene Wilder.
They saw the hair, the eyes, the nervous energy, the strange pauses, the sudden bursts of emotion, and they assumed the comedy was the whole man.
But the final years showed something else. He was sensitive. He was private. He cared deeply about the effect he had on other people.
He didn't want children to associate Willy Wonka with illness. He didn't want to spend his remaining years chasing Hollywood's approval. And when his memory began betraying him, he still had people around him who knew the person underneath the characters. His story also forces us to reconsider what a final chapter actually means. We often think a celebrity's final years must be defined by the loss of fame. But Gene Wilder's story suggests something more complicated. His public life became smaller while his private life became more important. The world saw less of him, but the people closest to him saw the person that remained when the cameras were gone. And perhaps that's why his absence felt so mysterious for so long. We were searching for Gene Wilder in the places where celebrities usually remain visible.
But he wasn't there. He was at home. He was writing. He was painting. He was spending time with Karen. He was living quietly.
And when the truth finally became known, it wasn't some scandalous secret or shocking betrayal.
It was something much more human.
A man who had spent his entire career creating unforgettable memories was slowly losing some of his own. And rather than allowing the world to turn that pain into entertainment, he kept it private. There's also a strange symmetry in the story. Gene Wilder once created a character who made people question what was real. Willy Wonka could smile while hiding something. He could appear vulnerable and then suddenly reveal complete control. He could make an audience laugh while keeping them slightly uncomfortable. Wilder understood that people are complicated.
They can be funny and sad at the same time. They can be strong and frightened at the same time.
They can be surrounded by people and still have an intensely private inner world.
Perhaps that's why his final years feel so moving.
The man who spent his career teaching audiences not to believe everything they see eventually became someone the public couldn't fully see at all. We saw an older Gene Wilder disappearing from Hollywood, but we didn't know what was happening behind that door. We didn't know how much effort was going into preserving his dignity. We didn't know that his wife was noticing changes in his memory. We didn't know that he was choosing privacy partly because he wanted to preserve the magic people associated with him. And maybe the thing we all suspected wasn't that Gene Wilder had some dark secret. Maybe what we suspected was simply that there had to be more to his disappearance than retirement. There had to be a reason a man so beloved would become so quiet. And eventually, we learned that the answer was not about fame at all. It was about aging, memory, love, and dignity. Gene Wilder spent decades giving people characters they would never forget. But in the end, his own greatest legacy may have been something much quieter. It was the way he chose to face a devastating illness without turning it into a spectacle. It was the way Karen stayed beside him. It was the way he could still find pleasure in a swimming pool. And it was the final trust he placed in the woman who had shared the last chapter of his life. So when you watch Willy Wonka now, perhaps the character feels different. That strange smile.
That careful pause. That uncertainty in his eyes. The feeling that he knows something you don't.
It all hits a little harder because we now know something about the man behind that performance. Gene Wilder understood better than almost anyone that laughter and sadness can exist in the same moment. And maybe that's the most heartbreaking truth of all. The world remembers Gene Wilder for making people believe in magic. But in his final years, the magic wasn't on a movie set.
It wasn't inside a chocolate factory. It wasn't surrounded by cameras.
It was in the ordinary moments that remained when everything else had disappeared. A quiet morning, a familiar song, a swim in a pool, a wife sitting beside him, and two final sentences that said everything that mattered. I trust you. I love you. For a man who spent his life performing for millions, those may have been the most important words he ever spoke. If Gene Wilder's story reminded you of just how much can exist behind the public image of someone we think we know, don't leave yet. There are countless other beloved stars whose final years contained stories the public barely heard about. Moments of courage, heartbreak, private struggles, and decisions that completely change the way we remember them. If you want more of these deeply researched celebrity stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And if Gene Wilder meant something to you, leave a comment with your favorite performance of his. Was it Willy Wonka? Young Frankenstein? Blazing Saddles? Or one of the many characters that made you laugh without ever knowing what the man behind the performance was carrying? Sometimes the stars we remember most clearly are the people whose private lives we understood the least. And Gene Wilder's final years may be the clearest reminder of that.